Welcome back to part 2. Now, if you remember this morning, somebody said after church that you don't need to start with if you remember this morning, because most of us are going to sleep in between services. So we're going to start fresh. We're looking at Job and the adversity of Job, and this morning we looked at how Job got through the adversity. And the first thing that we looked at this morning is that he accepted God. He accepted God as the judge, as the creator, and one who had faith that Job was able and capable to overcome whatever God allowed him to endure. Have faith. The second part of that is not only did Job accept God, but Job also accepted himself. He accepted who he was. And the grand scheme of things, in perspective of who God is, Job accepted who he was. So you absolutely, when you're facing adversity, difficult circumstances in life, remember who you are. Remember yourself. In particular, we're going to begin looking at, as we remember ourselves, remember that Job was weak. And we as human beings, we are weak. And what I mean by that is that we are totally and utterly, completely dependent upon God. We are at the mercy of God for everything in this life. I mean, tomorrow, a famine could strike. And the price of corn would skyrocket. And when corn goes up, everything else goes up. Or tomorrow, there could be this strange disease that escapes from a foreign country and shuts down the entire world. We are completely at the mercy of God. Job understood that he was at the mercy of God. And that's where we're going to begin here in Job chapter 1. When we remember our weakness, we remember that we are at the mercy of God. Look at this, actually Job chapter 2, beginning in verse 9. When his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." It's one of our favorite verses. You know, what a woman. There she is. But he said to her, see the wisdom in this. He said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God? And shall we not receive evil?" In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Job understood, I am at the mercy of God. God gives good things and God allows bad things to happen. And we'll look at that a little bit later on. But I mean, goodness gracious, we've been so blessed, Job said. And now it seems as if God has turned his back on us. Well, I mean, it's about time. We are completely and totally dependent upon God for everything. And if you flip over a few chapters, look at chapter 9. Look at this one. In verse 15 and verse 16, look at what it says here. "Though I am in the right, I cannot answer him. I must appeal for mercy to my accuser. If I summoned him and he answered me, I would not believe that he was listening to my voice." I am utterly at the mercy of God. The only thing that I can do is appeal to God for mercy. I mean, I don't deserve anything else. I mean, it's like you've created this pot, and the pot is asking you, hey, you need to be better to me. Well, you are completely at the mercy of your Creator. You're completely at the mercy of the one that made you. He's at the mercy of God. Again, a few chapters later in chapter 16 and verse 16, look at what it says here. "My face is red with weeping, and on my eyelids is deep darkness." I mean, you see a man in total despair. We see him at perhaps what is his weakest moment. And he is at the mercy of God. You remember this morning we talked about this conversation that got more like a monologue, that God says, "Where were you when I did this. Where were you when I formed this? You remember. And that takes place in Job chapter 38. Then he talks about the inanimate world there. Then he talks about the animate world in chapter 39. And then Job replies. After all this, Job answers in chapter 40. And look at what he says there. I believe this is maybe the conclusion to all of it. If we were to wrap up the book of Job into 3 verses, this is it. Job chapter 40, verse 3, verse 4, and verse 5. Then Job answered the Lord and said, "Behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once and I will not answer, twice, but I will proceed no further." I'm of small account. When I think about God as the creator of the world, the one that's going to judge me, it takes a lot of boldness to stand up to that guy. It takes a lot of courage to stand up and question the one that holds your life in his hand. When we understand that we are of small account, that we are worth nothing, that we are worthless, and that even our most righteous deeds are in the sight of God, as Ezekiel says, like filthy garments, like nothing. When we remember that, it puts our weakness in perspective. And when we remember our weakness and our total dependence upon God for everything, it makes it going through adversity a lot easier. And I say that, and let me connect the dots for you. Because when we understand how small and insignificant we are, when we understand that I am of small account, that I am worth nothing, the only way that we can get through a difficult circumstance, the only way that we can get through this life is if we depend on someone bigger and better than us. You can't do it by yourself. You cannot get through this life by yourself. You need God. I am of small account. I think when we remember this, it's going to help our prayer life. When we remember, you're talking to the Almighty. You're talking to the Creator, the Judge. So you're talking to the one that has done everything for you. Maybe many more of us need to say, like Job, I lay my hand on my mouth. You know, I spoke once, but I'm not going to do it again. Remember yourself and your weakness. Also remember the difficulties. When you remember the difficulties in this life, it makes getting through adversity a whole lot easier. And let's go back and look at a passage that we already looked at this morning, and I want to revisit that in chapter 1. We see through, at the end of this, in verses 13 through 19, we're not going to look at all this, but at the conclusion of this, then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshiped. You remember that in verse 20. He was a man of incredible distress. Tore his clothes, obviously, remorse, agony, sorrow, despair. Shaved his head, humility, embarrassment. He fell on the ground. You don't do that. That's a grown man. You don't fall on the ground. He fell on the ground and he worshiped. He remembered who he was. But what led up to that is a series of events that none of us have ever experienced in this life. And God forbid any of us ever experienced something like this before. He loses his oxen. I'm going to read it. Y'all are here. You're at my mercy. So I'm just going to read it. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them. And the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. You talk about difficulties. Children are born to bury their parents. No parent needs to bury their child, let alone 10. This man at this moment, at this juncture in his life, he has lost everything. It's all gone. And there's a few reasons why he's lost everything. And Job is our go-to source, or one of the go-to sources as to why there is evil, why there is pain and suffering in the world. And this particular passage in chapter 1 gives us 2 of those reasons. The first is because of moral evil, what we call moral evil. Moral evil is God has created us with free moral agency. You don't have to be here. You could be anywhere that you want to be. Thank goodness that you have chosen to be here. But people, because they have the ability to choose to do right, or they have the ability to choose to do what is wrong, sometimes we choose to do what's wrong. What happened here? The Sabaeans chose to do what is wrong in killing the oxen, or taking the oxen and the donkeys and killing these servants. The Chaldeans, they have chosen to do what is wrong. We see 2 accounts of moral evil. We also see 2 accounts of natural evil. The fire of God, it says in verse 16, came, and it struck down and it burned the sheep and the servants. And also we see the natural evil in the world in the wind that struck the 4 corners of the house and caused the house to collapse. Natural evil. Now, the result, obviously, of moral evil is God's love for you. God has created every single one of us with the ability to choose to do what is right. I mean, He doesn't want like a housewife chained up in the kitchen saying, I love you, but never giving her the option to leave. That's not love. God has given us freedom to demonstrate His love. And because God has given us freedom, there came a time when man was living in paradise. Listen to me. Paradise. Perfect. Perfection. It doesn't get any better than this. When man was living in paradise, they chose to do what is wrong. The result is they were kicked out of paradise. And when they were kicked out of paradise, guess what? They entered an imperfect world. And it is my proposition that entrance into the imperfect world brings about this natural evil. Why is there moral evil? Why is there natural evil in the world? In my opinion, it boils down to sin. But all of this, the conclusion to all of this, when we recognize our difficulties, when we recognize moral evil and natural evil and all the pain and suffering in the world, it all points us in one direction. I'm ready to get home. It all points us to heaven. And that's where we are in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Flip over there real quick. 2 Corinthians chapter 4. One of my favorite passages in the book of 2 Corinthians. And I believe it's beautiful. Beginning in verse 16, he says, "So we do not lose heart, though our outer self," look at this, "our outer self is wasting away. Our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison." God has allowed evil into this world. God has allowed moral evil and natural evil in order that we might be prepared for eternity. And I don't know about you, but there is nothing that lets me look more forward to heaven than pain. I mean, when you see someone suffering, they're laying in the hospital, ultimately this is where they're going to pass away. I am so excited to tell them, I may not see you in this life, but bet your bottom dollar I'll see you in the next life. And it's going to be a whole lot better than this cancer that you're fighting. Or when you're sitting there with a family that has just lost a loved one, you can pat them and you can hug them on the back and say, guess what? There's something better. We're not created for this world. And when we recognize our difficulties, when we recognize the adversity that we face in life, just like Job did, it points us to something better. We also remember how temporary we are. This life it's so short. And Job, several times throughout this account, he reminds us how short time is. Because our life, it's so temporary. It's here and then it's gone. For instance, look with me in Job chapter 7. He says, beginning in verse 7, he says this, "Remember that my life is a breath. My eye will never again see good. The eye of him who sees me will behold me no more. While your eyes are on me, I shall be gone. As the cloud fades and vanishes, so he who goes down to Sheol does not come up. He returns no more to his house, nor does his place know him anymore." Life is so short. Just a couple chapters over in chapter 9, in verse 25 and verse 26, this is what Job says here. He says, "My days are swifter than a runner. They flee away, they see no good. They go by like skiffs of reed, like an eagle swooping on the prey." It's here, and then it's gone. Chapter 14, verse 1 and verse 2. "Man who is born of a woman is few of days and full of trouble. He comes out like a flower and withers. He flees like a shadow and continues not." Life is so short. I mean, you can think that, man, 80 years is a long time. And to a 5-year-old, 80 years does seem like an eternity. But to a 70-year-old, 80 years is a pretty short time. Life is so short. When we remember how temporary we are and that we are created for eternity, it helps us get through adversity. It doesn't matter what happens to us in this world. It doesn't matter what happens to us in this life. We can get through anything because we are not created for this life. We're created for something better. And isn't that what John chapter 3 and verse 16 is all about? You could probably quote it. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life." We're going to die. This life is short. It's here for a little while and then it vanishes. It's like a cloud. It's like an eagle swooping over its prey. It's here and then it's gone. You're not going to see it anymore. But I got good news. Jesus died so that we can have eternity. It's easy. You want to kick death in the rear? It's through Jesus. You don't want to die anymore? This life too short for you? Hey, I got good news. There's another life. It's better than this life, and it's free. Jesus has already paved the way. If we're not living for eternity, we're not doing something right. If we're thinking about this world and focused on this world, I mean, why? This world is so short. Well, I mean, we are created in weakness, especially when we contrast ourselves to God. We are at His mercy, especially when it comes to eternity. We're at the mercy of God. Because of Jesus, the price has been paid. The way has been paved. All you need to do is come as we stand and as we sing.